Thank you for joining us once again. This is our weekly public health update and media briefing with Montgomery County Executive Mark Elridge. I'm Lorna Virgili, Hispanic Public Information Officer. And joining us today is Dr. Nina Ashford, Chief of Public Health Services, Dr. James Bridgers, Director of the Department of Health and Human Services, Mr. Sean O'Donnell, Assistant Chief of Public Health Services, and our special guest today is the former National Institutes of Health Director, Dr. Francis Collins. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Mr. County Executive, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you, everybody, for being here. And I'm really happy to have Dr. Collins here today. It's been a year since 6 lives were lost in the collapse of the Key Bridge in Baltimore, and that also created major economic disruption to the port. Fortunately, Governor Westmore and our congressional delegation provided the leadership we needed to secure federal funds to replace the bridge, and we were also able to help the families of the victims. We now have a timeline for when we can expect a new bridge to help strengthen the state's infrastructure and Maryland's economy. As I've traveled on our economic development missions, our county's proximity to the ports of Baltimore is definitely an asset. You know, when you think about it, if we're trying to get somebody to come to Montgomery County who has a serious company, they're not just coming here to build for the Montgomery County market or the Maryland market. They're looking to get a foothold in the United States. And pitching the Port of Baltimore and the rail lines that run through Baltimore has been part of what we talk about with companies when we say, if you come to Maryland, we can get your products anywhere in this country and anywhere in this world. So it's a good thing to be able to talk about. It's great to see it back in operation, and I'm sure the commuters will be more than happy, and the truck drivers more than happy to see that length of the bridge restored. It's important for the economic recovery of this part of the state, but it's also important to the entire state, including Montgomery County. A different topic, NIH is under attack and has continued to be under attack for a couple of months, it seems now. The National Institutes of Health, based right here in Bethesda, is essential to our local economy. More importantly, to the health and safety of people across the country. NIH employs 18,000 people on its main campus. When you include FDA and other parts, the Department of Health and Human Services, also headquartered in Montgomery County, HHS is the largest employer in the county. People who work at NIH and HHS in general are doing work that saves lives. They conduct groundbreaking research, develop life-saving treatments, and help us understand the causes of diseases. That work is now under threat from the Trump administration and its allies, including Elon Musk and his so-called DOGE advisors, who have absolutely no expertise in the field which they are now trying to regulate, because I think their only purpose is it's a field they're trying to destroy. Let's be clear, there's no legitimate justification for what they're doing. They aren't improving efficiency. None of them went in there and said, how can we make things run better? They came in there and said, how do we shut things down? And that's what this is about. And they're undermining public health in the process. And they're using the guise of attacking DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, as if those goals would somehow weaken science. But we know better. And I think this is one of the most important things that gets to how little they understand. For decades, drugs were tested almost exclusively on white men. Perhaps people didn't understand the difference in some of our genetic makeup that could affect a drug's efficacy. But we've known for a while now that research has shown that how drugs affect different people may be different based on the genetics of the particular population. We are all human, but there are differences in some of our genes, and some of our genes don't behave the same way or aren't corrected the same way by the same drug. And in some people, a drug that works for people like me doesn't work for other people. So none of this work was done on the principle of diversity. They didn't wake up and say we must develop diverse drugs. It's the reverse. They discovered that the drugs they had found working for one population weren't effective for others. And so they had to find out, how do they make new drugs or modify these drugs so they work on different populations? The DOGE people confused this whole idea of saying you're doing something and you're doing research on women or you're doing research on people of color, as if this is a political woke statement, as opposed to this is just the basic work that a good scientist does. This is not political correctness. It's not wokeness. All it is good science. People of different races and ethnicities and genders respond differently to these medications. And if you ignore those differences, health outcomes get worse and drugs become less effective. So the result of cutting funding for NIH and targeting anything that suggests that research is directed based on race or gender won't be neutral. It is harmful, and it will deny over half the population. When you consider all women and non-white males, they come to more than half this population. When you deny these people access to more effective medications, you are undermining their health. It will be the outcome is going to be the more Americans are going to get sick. They're going to suffer longer. They're going to lose trust in treatments that weren't designed with them in mind and therefore weren't as effective as they should be. But I think there's something even more sinister to this attack on science. NIH and anyone doing drug research doesn't just work to find cures. They also try to identify causes. And in that process, they're likely to be the ones to find the links between chemicals in our environment, like PFAS or pesticides, or microplastics or DDT, and a myriad of other chemicals that have been introduced without adequate study that have subsequently been linked to cancer and other illnesses. And what follows is that when bad things are found, researchers are going to let us know that they found that these things are problematic, and the logical response to finding that we are being subjected to things that harm our health is that people try to regulate it. You either try to make sure you don't use more than of the drug or chemical than you should, but you also try to make sure that we just don't have to put up with things that are harmful to our well-being. And I can think of so many environmental things over the years that research has determined we could fix just simply by removing them from our environment. This is not what the friends in the Trump administration want. They're trying to kill research, because if you kill research, you kill the justification for regulation. They know exactly what they're doing and why they're doing it. So what we're seeing is a deliberate effort to weaken the institutions that hold corporations accountable when they cause harm. This isn't a policy, it's a power play, and it puts profits over people, and people behind it know exactly what they're doing. It's malevolent and it's harmful, and it has to be stopped. And hopefully at some point, some of Congress will come to its senses. I'm really happy to have Dr. Francis Collins on this week's media briefing. He's one of the most accomplished scientists in this country has produced. He led the Human Genome Project, identified genes tied to major diseases, and served as NIH director under 3 presidents. After more than 30 years of service, he announced his retirement this March. Dr. Collins can discuss what these changes mean for NIH's mission and the thousands of people who work there and communities like ours that depend on a strong public health institution. So I want to thank Dr. Collins for being here.
Well, thanks, Mark, and hello to everybody. I'm a little tight on time, so I will speak rather quickly about the consequences of what's being faced right now by NIH, which Mark has already outlined, and it is a remarkably difficult time. I'm a 32-year resident of Montgomery County, during all of which time I've worked at the National Institutes of Health in various capacities, and then retired about 3 weeks ago. But I am certainly deeply troubled about what we see as major changes that are being imposed upon the crown jewel of the federal government, which is what NIH is often referred to as. If you saw the New York Times article a day or two ago, calling chaos and confusion, that's how it feels for people at NIH right now, with so many different things coming down from executive orders and rules that are being applied by the department or by the DOGE team that are very difficult to understand in terms of how they are going to actually improve the mission of the enterprise. I've been around a long time. I've been through transitions. I know that there's always things that happen in the government when there's a change in administrations. And that part is to be expected, that they're going to be hiring freezes and so on. But this is different. This has involved quite a number of really quite dramatic actions that are degrading the ability of NIH to perform the mission that I think the taxpayers expect us to do in terms of making discoveries about how life works and how disease happens and what to do about it. And we've been incredibly successful at that over these many decades. Deaths from heart disease, deaths from cancer are dropping significantly. Sickle cell disease is being cured. NIH played a significant role in the development of those COVID vaccines that are estimated to have saved 3.1 million lives in the US alone. This is a pretty impressive track record, but it doesn't just happen because you hope for it. It really requires a lot of resources and support. For the intramural program, which is located in Bethesda, but also in some other places nearby, investigators there are finding themselves quite hamstrung, not being given the opportunity to order supplies. Travel is prohibited. And of course, there was a big cut on Valentine's Day of 1,165 employees, mostly chosen because they had been at NIH for less than a year. Many of those were people who were bringing with them new and exciting ideas. That's why they'd been hired, and yet those were systematically shown the door. Some of them have been invited back, I'm happy to say, but a great cloud is looming over NIH now with reductions in force, RIFs as they're called, being required of an uncertain number, but the numbers one hears are somewhere between 3,400 and 5,000 employees who would be reduced, that is, let go, which is approaching a quarter of the entire workforce. That kind of effort can't happen without serious and severe consequences to everything we're trying to do for cancer, for heart disease, for diabetes, for rare diseases, for common diseases, for infectious diseases, all of those. So if you know people in your neighborhood who work at NIH, be sympathetic with what they are going through. It's certainly a time of considerable anxiety. Of course, most of NIH's resources aren't spent here. They go out in grants to institutions, universities, research facilities across the country. 85% of the funds go out there. But those too have been in a somewhat unusual and difficult circumstance where grants that mention certain topics are now being terminated. And some of those topics certainly include things like diversity, but more recently, even grants that were studying vaccine hesitancy are now considered to be no longer appropriate for federal support, which is hard to understand when you consider that vaccine hesitancy in the case of measles right now is a pretty big deal. In the case of COVID, where estimates are more than 200,000 people died because they were not sure the vaccine was right for them. So this seems like not something that makes a lot of sense. But I think the main thing I'd want to say is if you're concerned about NIH, the voices we need to hear from are the patients, people whose lives are kind of in the breach right now in terms of clinical trials that may be getting underway for things like Alzheimer's disease or ALS or cancer, where it's not clear whether those trials are going to be able to go forward as quickly and as boldly as they need to. The other group of people I worry about are the young investigators, the graduate students, the postdocs, the fellows who are embarking upon what are going to be amazing careers at an amazing time of medical potential. And yet all of those folks are really deeply alarmed about whether that career path is there for them. And I've talked to quite a few of them in the last couple of weeks who are seriously considering whether they may have to leave the United States if they're going to pursue their dream. We were always the place where everybody wanted to come to pursue their scientific dreams. And now the idea that that might flip around the other way is almost inconceivable, but it is where we are. So I am hopeful that with the new NIH director having been confirmed in the last 24 hours, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford, we will have an actually confirmed leader who arrives and who can look around and try to see what he can do to try to avoid the extreme degree of damage that may be underway. And let me be clear, there's lots of things in any government agency that can be improved. When I was NIH director for 12 years, we spent a lot of our time trying to identify those areas that maybe weren't as productive and needed to be phased out, and others that were ready for a big boost. That's what you do. But it's got to be done on the basis of opportunity. And that isn't necessarily what's happened in the course of the last 2 months. So I'm hoping new leadership may be able to stabilize this situation, because I think that's what the public would hope for. That is what, of course, patients are hoping for. For me now, as a retired leader, I am certainly hoping to see this remarkable engine of discovery having the opportunity to run the way that it can to save lives. And by the way, support our economy in a big way as well. That's often not noticed as much, but it's a huge part of what government support of science has done. So I'll stop there. I am really tight on time. I could take maybe one or two questions if that would be appropriate. Mark, I don't know what your usual agenda is.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Collins. Yeah, two hands are up already. Kate Ryan, WTOP, that Dr. Collins does have a hard stop, so make it very quick, Kate.
Totally understand. What is your fear about who might benefit? In other words, many of these international talents, where will they end up going? And what if the new director is unable to turn things around?
Well, again, where would people go? I think Europe has seen the circumstance in the US and are putting out the red carpet for our young talent, saying, hey, if you're looking for an opportunity to pursue science, we're open for business. So a lot of people will be potentially considering that. I guess if it's not possible for the new director to put some kind of brakes on what is currently happening, we would have to count on other forces like the Congress. Let me be clear. The Congress has always been a wonderful supporter of NIH. It's been one of the most bipartisan parts of what the government does. In my 12 years as NIH director, I was every bit as close and well supported by Republicans as by Democrats. It was so wonderful. We didn't have to talk politics when we talked medical research. Somehow that seems to have degraded at this point. But I would still hope the Congress would step in and take their role. After all, they are the ones who appropriate the money for medical research and ought to have a lot of interest, therefore, in what's happening at this point.
Thank you. One more question, Jeannie Bixby, Bethesda Today. Make it quick, Jeannie.
Thank you. Hi, Dr. Collins. You just spoke about how you could see some of these researchers going abroad. But also, do you see this being something where if we can't count on the government for this research, that this is a place where the private sector is going to have to step up?
You know, Jenny, I think it's really important to understand that the success of American biomedical research has been an ecosystem that involves the public sector and the private sector in a way that has been remarkably successful. The public sector does research that isn't tied directly to a product. The private sector can't really justify doing that. The reason that you have drugs now on the shelves that are saving lives and reducing suffering is because that ecosystem works. A recent estimate is that 99% of the drugs that you all may have in your medicine cabinet have an NIH connection, but they were ultimately picked up to be turned into pills by the private sector and by biotech. This has worked wonderfully. But if you take away the foundation of basic discoveries and translational science that NIH does, then you've removed all of the feeding that needs to happen for the private sector to be successful. I kind of wish the private sector would make some more noise right now about this, because their future is at risk in a big way by what's happening now. Might not notice it for the few months, but 10 years from now, if NIH has lost its bearings and lost its momentum, there'll be serious consequences for the entire system.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Thank you, Dr. Collins, for joining us this afternoon. We do know
Thank you
that
so much.
you need to take part.
see you.
So thank you for answering those questions. We'll see you again soon. Mr. County Executive.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. And I hear you're still playing guitar. That's a good thing. I just want to just say that, I think his points are really important. When we do travel around, that we have spent a lot of our energy talking to companies in the bioactive sphere, life sciences and drug development and the like. When we talk about NIH and FDA, everybody around the world we've talked to recognizes them as the leading institution probably in the world in the field that they're in. And one of the interests people have in coming to America is the ability to partner with and, work with NIH and to look at the things that come out of NIH as opportunities for moving drug development further. And if NIH can't fulfill that goal, there will be less reason for people, top scientists and companies to come to the United States. And that's bad for us health-wise, and it's bad for us economically. So if you want to surrender economic leadership in medicine to somebody else in the world, destroy NIH. That'll bleed it of talent. The talent will find someplace else to go where they're wanted. The work that could have been done here and that could have advanced our economy will be done someplace else. And this will not end well for America. So for somebody as a president who's so obsessed with what he claims his concerns about the economy, doing what he's doing right now is anti any of his goals to build a stronger economy. All it's going to do is weaken it. And I hope that some of the large companies and some of the patients make their voices known. I agree with Dr. Collins. The last time Trump tried to cut NIH, they actually got more funding. And that was because a bipartisan Congress said this is too valuable to lose. A lot of those same people who voted, a few years ago to make the funding more for NIH are still in Congress. And they're on the other side of the aisle. And perhaps they'll decide that, NIH isn't important now as it was 5 and 6 years ago. Maybe they'll stand up and say, this is a bridge too far, and we're not going to go along with the cuts. We can only hope. In the meantime, speaking of cuts, on Monday we launched a new initiative called Mobilize Montgomery to strengthen the local economy, support local businesses, and employees who are leaving federal service. The Mobilize Montgomery Coalition includes Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, Chamber of Commerce, Maryland Department of Labor, WorkSource Montgomery, the Maryland Women's Business Center, Rockville Economic Development, and several locals of Chamber of Commerce are also partners. Mobilize Montgomery County is a centralized resource hub that ensures businesses, employees, and residents have access to critical information and support during this challenging time, and it's designed to be a one-stop resource. The site offers connections to webinars, job posting websites, and business incentives to the public. Additionally, Mobilize Montgomery will allow local businesses to express their interest in participating in relevant events and enable interested employees to be notified of updated resources and upcoming events. The Mobilize Montgomery website can be found at mobilize-montgomery.com, and we hope this new resource is shared throughout our community and helps anyone impacted by federal actions and decisions. I think, as you all know, last week I was in Taipei. I attended the Smart City Summit and Expo and met with Taiwanese executives seeking to grow their businesses through U.S. market entry. I think all of us realize that even developing products in Asia outside of China, the markets are relatively small. And so for business to be successful, they want access to larger markets. And we're looking for people who have products and developments that are worthwhile and who are interested in entering the U.S. market. We would like to be home to them. We just set up a place in our incubator for a Korean group that is going to help be a launch pad for Korean businesses trying to enter the U.S. economy. And we're trying to work with Taiwan and to find other partners along a similar vein. Taiwan has a strong cluster of biohealth, clean tech, and information technology companies. Some of the companies are looking to expand here, and trips like us give us the opportunity to pitch them as to why Montgomery County is a wonderful place to bring their operations. I was joined by Maryland Secretary of State Susan Lee and a contingent from the state, along with County Council Member Andrew Friedson and business leaders from our community who joined us on the trip. Those business leaders can make the strongest case for our community as a safe and welcoming place for foreign businesses. And I've talked about this before. You cannot underestimate the voice of people who are native to the countries that we're visiting, who are telling people why this is a place to come, where you can raise a family, where you can have a successful business, and where you'll be supported. And so those voices really make a difference when we're talking to people, whether it's Taiwan or Korea, India, Vietnam, it all matters. while we were in Taiwan, and not only met with business prospects, but also signed an economic partnership agreement with the mayor of Taipei. We also met with the mayors of New Taipei City and the city of Taichung. The agreement was the first of its kind for Taipei in 26 years. It focused, our other government-to-government meetings, on expanding bilateral trade and economic development opportunities for residents of Montgomery County and Taiwan. It was pretty much a whirlwind trip. I want to tell you about my long plane delay and miserable saga waiting to get off the ground. But I feel like we made progress in developing the kind of connections that pay off for both of us. And we did meet with industry leaders, not only in biotech and AI, but also companies in the forefront of clean energy innovations, which align with our county's climate action plan goals. Working with Taiwanese businesses, government, and academic leaders will help our county and state create jobs and diversify our economy. Increased trade benefits all local businesses and customers, and there are many positive aspects that come with targeted international travel. And I hope to share more updates with you soon. We'll just close by saying, we're looking not just for the bio aspect of these trips. We're very interested in manufacturing, particularly light manufacturing for people who have devices and other things they think that we know can be actually manufactured in the United States. We had a very productive discussion with the solar company there that has some unique solar panels, and we're talking to them about the possibility of doing a pilot with their product to see if it performs in a way that they believe it can perform. So stay tuned for that one. The public's going to be able to weigh in on my proposed operating budget for the next fiscal year on Monday, April 7th and Tuesday, April 8th. Residents are already signing up through County Council website or calling 240-777-2800. 4 sessions are available starting at 1:30 and 7 p.m. each day. The deadline to sign up is Friday, April 4th at noon. Last week, the General Assembly and the governor agreed to a budget framework that provided some more clarity on the potential impacts on our proposed FY26 budget. However, many costs and benefits are still unknown, and that's what made it impossible for us to have a final budget when we had to submit it on the 14th of March. There was no way of knowing what our revenues were going to be or what our costs were going to be. We know the things that we control, but in a very unusual year, we didn't know the magnitude of either the revenues we might get or the cost shifts from the state that might land on the county. And so our budget is still a little bit in limbo pending the final outcome of the session. There are some pretty large dollar figures out there. The teachers, the state will likely shift more of the teacher pensions from the state to the county. That could be close to $20 million. When we did the budget, the number that was floating out there was between 20 and 40. The blueprint costs that were shifted from the state to the county in the proposed budget could have been up to $20 million, but those numbers seem to be coming down. We're optimistic about that. On the bright side, the county could see some new revenue through income tax changes. There is so much still uncertain, since neither the state nor the county is quite sure what the election of Trump will mean, although there's plenty of evidence out there that it's going to be a downside risk. So we're waiting for the Senate and the House to come together and have some firm joint agreement on what the budget's going to look like. And we've promised the council that within a week of the state giving us a budget, we'll come back with revisions. One of the things that could get revised is the property tax increase. When we put the budget together, we looked at the worst case scenario. What if everything shifted to us, and what if we didn't get the amount of money that we were expected to get or was proposed for us to get from changes in the income tax structure? We know already that the proposed change from that structure is less than we were told, but we're also seeing some reductions in the cost shifts. But the 3.5% property tax increase reflected what we thought was the worst case. It's always easier to reduce the taxes than it is to increase the taxes. So council had a deadline for submitting a tax proposal, and we wanted to make sure that proposal was in there. It does not have to be the final word, and hopeful that it's not the final word and where the property tax has to go. If the budget impacts are reduced, then we'll be making those reflections. But I also want to say about the school system, this tax increase ensures that MCPS per pupil funding continues to rise in Montgomery County. That's important because we are still, if this budget I propose passes for the schools, we'll still be spending $2,000 less per pupil than we were spending 12 years ago. And that's one of the problems the school systems had, is the amount of money going into the school system has not gone up commensurate to where it was during the Great Recession. And that loss in revenue has meant real losses for services that are in the schools that impact the classrooms. The loss of aid time is one of the biggest impacts on teachers and on classrooms. And nobody should misunderstand or underestimate the value of aides when it comes to helping a teacher in a classroom, particularly when the classrooms have the diversity level they have, and the lessons are a lot more complicated to perform than they used to be. So this budget is especially important for the schools. And one of the other key aspects is this budget improves this ratio of teachers per students with special needs. There are specific requirements that the school system has to meet, and MCPS is at the point where they are not meeting those requirements. And there's a concern that they could be held legally liable for not providing adequate support for the students. So our budget helped ensure that they could hire the necessary teachers to bring these ratios back into line. But this is important not just for these students. One of the impacts of not having enough special education teachers has been that students who should be in special education classes are in regular classes. And many of these students have trouble with issues like managing behavior, where they require a lot of attention in the process, for them to learn. And that can be very difficult in a regular classroom. And we hear a lot from parents. I've certainly got more than my fair share of notes about parents who are concerned about problems in the classroom and one or two children who act out in a way that's so disruptive that it makes it difficult to teach. When it makes it difficult to teach, it also makes it difficult for people to learn. So we need to make sure that students are placed in the setting that is most advantageous to them, whether they're special needs kids or just the regular kids in school. And this money is going to help the school make sure that kids are placed where they belong and get the kind of support they need. And I think that it's very, very important. Our proposed increase, if it were fully implemented, also comes with a $168 tax credit. And the effect of that is between the tax credit and the proposed tax increase, if you had a home worth about $495,000, the effective yield on taxes would be zero. A house assessed at $1 million would see their taxes increase by $350, but then reduced to $182 by the tax credit. That would take away $168 of that $350. So this is, it's our effort to introduce some progressivity into this. It raises the tax the full 3.5 cents on the commercial sector. I will point out that if the commercial sector were in Fairfax County, where everybody talks about, look who's going to Fairfax, I'll remind people again what they face in Fairfax County. The base property tax rate in Fairfax County, the base rate is $1.14 and about to go up. There is an additional 12.5 cents on all commercial property in Fairfax County. I'm going to say that again, 12.5 cents on all commercial property in Fairfax County. Those two things together raise the taxes paid in Fairfax County will raise them to over $100.27 compared to Montgomery County, which will be somewhere around $1.07 this time. So Fairfax counties are substantially higher for businesses, even though businesses will get a slightly larger raise here this year. If they were to go to Fairfax, they'd pay a lot more. If they were developing in Tyson's Corner, that number would go to $1.57. And Fairfax County has a tax which Montgomery doesn't have. This is a tax on all businesses. It's called the BPOL tax. It's based on a 3% gross receipts tax. It's different for some categories, but the big tax is 3% of gross receipts. And it's not an income tax, which is based on income. It's based on your gross dollars. And that amount of money raises for Fairfax County $200 million a year from the private sector. Montgomery County has nothing like that. So when you look at what Virginia's be able to do, and you get envious about their transit or things you see over there, just remember how much more Virginia is able to raise from the private sector than Montgomery County is able to raise from the private sector. You can't do what they do unless you have resources that are similar. And I'm convinced and continue to be convinced we can stay well under Fairfax's higher numbers, but we need to raise more money than we're raising today. In my newsletter this week, I'm sharing FAQs on this year's proposal to help address some of the common questions my office gets about the budget, and you can see the budget online. And a final note, there was a win for drug affordability at the state level. While the federal government has turned to protecting the profits of corporations, specifically big pharma, over the health and welfare of people, it's good news that the American General Assembly is looking for consumers when it comes to prescription drug affordability. Bill 424, House Bill 424, aims to significantly expand the authority of the state's Prescription Drug Affordability Board. It's passed the House and is now in front of the Senate. The bill was filed along with Senate Bill 357, which will lower the amount of drugs that consumers pay for prescription drugs across Maryland. Delegates successfully fended off amendments that sought to protect some of the special interests, and we hope the same thing happens in the Senate. Efforts to expand the Prescription Drug Affordability Board go back several years, and I want to thank Montgomery County Delegate Bonnie Collison, who's been a real leader on these efforts. She said this legislation is not about controlling essential prices, but essentially telling drug companies there's a limit to what we can afford. Anybody who's ever looked at a drug price for something that they thought they were going to be able to take and then got curious and, say, wandered to a Canadian website or European website or Mexican website and discovered that the same drug that was $1,000 here was like $45 there, $100 there. You got to wonder how the same companies can sell the same drug for less money in other countries, but make the highest profits and have the highest prices on drugs here in the United States. We continue to see drug prices rise. It's one of the big contributors to the rising costs of healthcare. Healthcare increases have no bearing on inflation. So what we see often in terms of what the county pays just for health for our own employees, the costs exceed the inflation rate. And a lot of that has to do with drugs. We have to do better, and I'm glad to see that the state is using the authority it has to try to bring drug prices more in line. And there's no rational reason other than the lack of political will on the part of some people at the national level for us not to put an end to the kind of prices that most Americans experience through the drugs. I want to thank the work done by Maryland Healthcare for All, a tireless advocacy group who's worked to strengthen this legislation and rally support behind it. Delegates Collison, Ann Kaiser, Leslie Lopez, Teresa Warman, and Senators Brian Feldman and Katie Fry-Hester have been co-sponsors on this legislation and have helped bring it this far. With this expanded power, Maryland's Prescription Drug Affordability Board will be a national model and show other states how to end the out-of-control era of drug pricing. I'd like to give my health team and others a chance to provide any updates they'd like before we take your questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. I'm happy to share that we are seeing a decrease in respiratory virus rates as well as hospitalization. So spring has sprung, not just in terms of the time of year, but hopefully folks getting outside and us seeing less viruses circulating. Dr. Ritters?
Thank you, Dr. Ashford. Mr. County Executive, no additional updates from the department overall. We continue to support all the programs, especially as we make the seasonal transition. So it's great to hear that our respiratory illnesses are declining now as we move further into spring.
Thank you, Dr. Ashford and Dr. Bridgers, members of the media. We are going to open it up right now for general questions. Please raise your hands. Kate Ryan, WTOP. Good afternoon again, Kate. Kate?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you for the update on the flu. What about bird flu? I know that there was, and again, it's up in Harford County, so that's some distance from us, but a large number of vultures were found dead. They're checking it out for flu, et cetera. What is our status in Montgomery County regarding bird flu right now? And also the latest on measles and concerns about that spread. What's going on there?
Yes, thank you, Kate. So we have not had any additional cases of bird flu hit Montgomery County since the backyard flock that happened a couple of months ago. And we, our disease control team worked closely with that case and the state, and we didn't see any further spread from that. So as far as Montgomery County goes, no continued updates and kind of all preventive guidance that we previously shared about if you see a large bird like a raptor or a vulture, we can share the information on where to call and report, but continue to use the same preventive practices. So no, the good news is no further cases or updates there. As far as measles goes, we continue to monitor. We did just see the confirmed case in DC, and I think the cases in Prince George's County last week. We've not had any cases in Montgomery County. Once again, we continue to work with our disease control team. Montgomery County is in a great position given our high levels of vaccination rates, but should there be a measles case, our disease control team would work with the state as well as other partners. We just encourage folks once again to make sure that your children have received their MMR vaccine if they are old enough to do so. And for our little ones that are not old enough to be vaccinated, so our newborns less than 12 years or 12 months to 15 months old, please make sure you and your families are vaccinated. You can work with your primary care docs to check your titers and check your vaccination status online through my IR and make sure that you are up to date on your vaccines. As always, for all things, if you are sick, please stay home. Wash your hands, use good hygiene practices because there are still things out there circulating. But as of right now, no cases reported in Montgomery County.
And just
I'll just add
lastly,
that you folks in the press could really help by reminding people that this is a totally controllable disease. If you're vaccinated, you really don't get sick. It's, when we had higher vaccination levels, people didn't get sick. We didn't talk about measles breaking out in the community. So this is controllable. It's all in our hands. I just wanted to add one thing on bird flu. I got a text an hour and a half ago, and from the Secretary of Agriculture, and they found a flock in Brookville where they had a HPA bird flu positive test. So the state is dealing with the flock and containing it, and obviously they'll be looking to make sure that they don't see signs of the bird flu and other birds around that area. But this is new so far, but there was no case of human transmission related to this yet.
Gotcha. And I just wanted to follow up quickly with Dr. Ashford on this. Attitudes towards the measles vaccine. Are we seeing a shift there? Nationally, we see some people who feel, oh, measles, it's not that big a deal. It's not bad. Can you talk about attitudes here in Montgomery County and what you really want people to understand about the threat here?
Yes. So what I would first and foremost say is just reiterate Montgomery County and our residents, we continue to see high rates of vaccination among our children. HHS partners very closely with MCPS to ensure that all of our kiddos are vaccinated, that are eligible to be vaccinated. What I would reiterate is the MMR vaccine is safe. It is effective. There is a reason we have not seen a death from measles in over 10 years, and the vaccines have worked so well. We now have the privilege, and I say privilege jokingly, for folks to question if they actually work. And we know that these vaccines are safe. They are grounded in evidence. They are grounded in science. They are not linked to autism, and it is good science, it is good medicine, it is good prevention to ensure that your children and yourselves have received your vaccines. Vaccinations are one of the greatest public health accomplishments in the past 100 years, and the reasons that we do not see childhood and infant death and illness like we used to 50, 60, 70, 90, 100 years ago. So please get vaccinated.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. Jeannie Bixby, Bethesda Today. Good afternoon, Jeannie.
Good afternoon, Lorna. Hi, Mark. You
Hey.
probably saw that Mitty Figueredo from the Parks Department issued a letter to the council president. She's concerned that your budget doesn't have enough funding for the parks.
Not true.
Could you talk about, well, that's why I'm asking you. Could you talk about the reasoning behind the parks budget and how and the amount?
They got enough money to cover the salaries and the workers. We made sure of that. And they got, we did not cut their basic operations. This is additional money, mind you. We didn't make any cuts to their budget. And their effort to try to portray it that way is false. They asked for additional money. We gave them money for the salaries and other needs. We didn't give them everything they wanted. A lot of people didn't get everything they wanted. We have really heavy needs in the social services. We've got, increasing numbers of homelessness, increasing numbers of problems with health in the community, from people not having access to health care. Our clinics are seeing, more patients, and we've got real, housing needs. With this county, we've made some big investments in affordable housing. If we had to prioritize things that were not necessary to do in that department, as opposed to things that were necessary, we chose to prioritize our limited resources on other things that had more value and met more urgent needs in our community. All that, along with being faced by cuts and the need for a tax increase in general, just to get through what may be happening down in the legislature here. So I feel like they got treated fairly. They got enough money to continue operations without making cuts. And, I wish I was allowed to have scrutiny over their budget the way they do. Remember, they're not a county agency. They are a state creation. And we do not have the kind of authority over them that we have over the other departments. I'm sorry she's unhappy. But, there are a lot of people in this community who can say they didn't get everything they wanted. Most of them understood that it isn't possible to give them everything they wanted, given the climate in the federal government, the loss of potential revenue there, and what the county is already experiencing. So she's overblowing what happened, and they are not harmed and they're not impaired in their operations.
So would you say that, because in this letter, she's saying that this is a cut to the operating budget. So would your argument be that
that's her choice?
They're not balancing it the way that you would?
Yeah. They've got enough money to pay the salaries. The idea that they would hold the workers hostage, because basically what she's saying is, I'll put the money into something else and not put it into my workforce. Well, you'll be violating your contract you negotiated with the workers. The money you've got covers your contracts, and don't try to play the workers off as if they're the victims of this, because it's not true.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeannie. Members of the media, any more questions for the county executive and or the health officials this afternoon? No more questions? Going once? Twice? Well, thank you everybody for joining us. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you again next time.